Welcome to MapleWoodian.com podcast. We have on the phone William Gaudelli. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, Joe. Thanks. How are you?
Good. Now, you are, first, many recall you are a former member of the school board,
That's right.
South Orange Maplewood Board of Education,
Yes.
and you are also a professor at Columbia.
That's right, at Teachers College.
Teachers College in Columbia, and also, of course, a Maplewood resident and parent. And now,
Yes,
I'm sorry?
you said yes, I am, proudly.
Proudly, yes, you should be. And, of course, an author of a new book, Global Citizenship Education, Everyday Transcendence.
Transcendence.
Thank you. I'm glad one of us knows how to pronounce it. And you will be at Words Bookstore tonight, May 30th at 7:30 p.m. in Maplewood Village to sign copies and discuss the book. And wanted to ask you, what is this about? It looks like it has a real youth focus, something to help youngsters and young people, as the description says, live in a more interdependent, complex, and fragile world. That's quite a task.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly it, Joe. So basically it looks at examples of curriculum and practices in education around what it means to inhabit this planet that we have that has a number of very serious issues, from global climate change to refugee crises to ecological challenges, as well as violence and strife. So the sort of fundamental issue in the book is how are schools, non-governmental organizations, and other community-based organizations working to educate young people for this shared future. And the premise of the book is based on the kind of global movement that is global citizenship education, which orients around those kinds of issues.
And what do you think is the biggest requirement for this? Is it education? Is it broader, encompassing of different groups? Are youngsters being properly trained and ready for this kind of a global, expansive world that they're growing up in?
I'd say generally not. Schools tend to be rearward oriented rather than future focused, and that's a sort of fundamental problem that we have in society, and that we really need to prepare kids not for the 20th century but for the 21st and beyond. And generally, I don't think schools have dealt with society on those terms. So the ways in which people are interconnected now, the way that media affects and shapes the knowledge universe and what people have access to, the ways in which the multiplicity of texts and the availability of information has changed conversations about politics. I mean, all of that is something that we are not doing a great job in preparing kids for. And generally speaking, I think we don't prepare them with the tools they need for both the skills and attitudes of working in an interdependent world, and that is increasingly becoming a reality. So the book attempts to both focus on that as a problem and illustrate practices around the world that are happening that point to promising and proven ways of doing this kind of work.
Can you give us an example of one of the practices we see elsewhere that should be done more in our schools?
Yeah, well, there's schools, nearby here in New York City who are doing multilingual education that is also preparing kids to be knowledgeable about the workings of international organizations like the United Nations. So they're very close to home in some cases. In other cases, they're more distant, such as a school that's based in Bangkok, Thailand, where they're really focusing on the development of how food gets to a table and how the ways in which food sourcing and distribution is affected by the local community and has global connectivity, along with a sort of inward-looking focus on one's motivations and one's desires and passions, and sort of how those affect the life course of individual students. So there are lots of different examples of practices that are illustrated in this book that show the kind of potential for thinking more forward in the way that we are about the world and about education, rather than the sort of academic, sole academic focus that is public education and really schools generally today.
Now, you probably have been following. Have you been following the school districts happening since you left, I assume?
Oh, sure.
And they've had some world language cutbacks.
Yes.
They did bring back elementary school language this year after cutting it, but there's also been other cutbacks. And now they're talking about a Chinese, at least a one-year course that's getting some funding from elsewhere. What did you recall when you were on the school board and maybe just watching how South Orange Maplewood does it? and obviously a lot of their problem is money. When you do have financial limits, what's the best approach to kind of expand this language, as you discussed, which makes a lot of sense?
Well, I think that's a real challenge. So school districts generally in New Jersey are challenged in order to raise revenues, and that's very difficult in a tax-strapped community like this one and others throughout the state. This is not unique in the world, of course, but certainly it's a situation that we find ourselves in, and I think that's kind of the constraints that the board works within. And so there really needs to be, I think, a broad-based social commitment to education that is oriented towards the future and recognizes the importance of language, the importance of knowledge of interaction in the world, and sensitivity to difference, and working together to address problems. And until we get to that point where we recognize the kind of importance of what's to come, I think schools will sort of be always tethered in the past, and I think that's the challenge that we have. So it's definitely based on resources and not will. I do think there's got to be a social will and a commitment to doing this kind of work at a broad-based level. Clearly, we're not there yet. I mean, we live in a society where we don't really value the education of all kids to the degree that we're willing to fund it in an expansive way. And until we get to that point, we're not going to have the resources that can support education like this. And so I think that's, a sort of ongoing challenge for this community and others.
And what are some of the other examples of things that should be looked at from the global perspective? Obviously, language is one of them, but in terms of areas of study, is there enough of the environment? Is there still enough even just economic and math?
I think a lot of that is really crucial. I point to in the book illustrations of practice around the global economy and how there are districts and teacher education institutions in particular that are focused on the ways in which the global economy is bound together and how that serves some folks well and other folks not so well, and the injustices that are created economically as a result of the system that's been created. So that's something in which we generally don't teach a lot about. World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, those sorts of institutions that have a significant impact in the way international commerce occurs and the way then it trickles down into local communities. So there's not a lot of attention to that. I think there really needs to be a great deal more, and there are practices in the world where that is happening more robustly. So that's one I would point to for sure. Another one, as you point to, is the environmental challenges that we have, that we face. There are illustrations in the book of places where this is a center point. So looking at sustainable development and how the environment needs to be figured into development and not sort of an afterthought and really built into the sort of means of production. That's a crucial issue that kids should be talking about. We really, in a sense, our generation has left the future generation with a significant set of challenges and an international framework that doesn't work really well to address them. And so we've got to both reconfigure the system as well as address these issues. And, unfortunately, from my point of view, is the system has not addressed or looked at the ways in which schools need to be reconfigured to address the future.
And remind people, how long have you lived in Maplewood?
I've been here 11 years. So
and what years were you on the school board?
I was there 2011, 2014.
And give people an idea of your background. You obviously are at Teachers College in Columbia, but how long? Give people your quick background and your connection to this book.
Sure. I'm a professor and a chair, and I do research in global citizenship ed and teacher development. I founded the Global Competence Certificate Program, which is an online certificate program for teachers. And I'm a former high school teacher of a decade. I taught in New Jersey, and then after that got my doctorate here at Rutgers, and then went to Central Florida for 6 years, and then became a professor at Teachers College and have been there for the past 11 years.
Excellent. So in your research for this book, did you find any other examples of how school districts like Maplewood, South Orange and Maplewood, with real tight budgets, how they managed to expand in these areas that you're talking about with such limited budgets?
In the cases where there's expansion going on, mainly it's a core group of people that are committed to doing this kind of global work and see it as important. And then typically one of the challenges is that though it's happening within a school district, there's a small group of committed people that are driving the change, and a lot of it is they're taking it out of high. They're doing it in addition to their other responsibilities, whether it's running a global club that does international travel, or if it's doing a language immersion program, or those kinds of things. They're happening, again, not as part of the regular focus of the school, but as an extra and add-on. And I think that's a fundamental problem, that we don't see it as core work of schools. We see it as a nice thing to have, but not a central component of what it means to be educated in the 21st century. So that's the kind of pivot that we need to change. The other thing about the book is it features programs that are community-based and non-governmental oriented, meaning that it's not happening in schools. And so there are other organizations that are civic organizations that are stepping up to address these kinds of problems. So that's another component or dynamic of what's happening in this space right now.
And what did you see in your time at the school board, and now as obviously a parent and a long-time resident, ways that our district could jump into these areas, knowing how the district operates and the people who are willing to help?
Right. Well, I think we could change in terms of the social studies curriculum. Again, this is something that the district has to decide it wishes to do, but the social studies curriculum in particular could be situated around global themes more so than it is. I think right now it has a sort of national focus exclusively. And, of course, there are international components, whether it's world history or geography, but they're not situated around the idea that people are both inhabitants of the United States, of this community, but also of the world. And that kind of sense of agency, or what it means to be a citizen within a broader context and how one affects that context and is shaped by it, I think is a missing component within the way in which we deal with civic engagement. So that would be something I would love to see addressed in the district. Again, it's a lot easier to say that from the outside than it is.
Well, but you were on the inside, so you have a little more insight than
in some respects for sure
some
I
people.
was, and then I think that's something I try to address as a board member. But at that time, there really wasn't the interest in broadening what we were focused on. The focus really was on promoting equity and excellence, and so the ways in which global figured into that were never developed clearly. And I think that was something I regret as a board member. But you act as one person on a larger body within a large district. And so I think this is a great opportunity, actually, that we have a new superintendent search going on, and I would hope that people would, have this on their radar as an important piece. We have organizations in the community that are committed to doing this kind of international work, such as the Soma Asians Group and the Soma Global Group and others. So I think there's a lot of energy to do this, and I would like to see that taken up by the new superintendency.
Excellent. We've been talking to William Gaudelli, college professor, former school board member, and author of Global Citizenship Education, Everyday Transcendence. And he will be at Maplewood Village's Words Bookstore tonight, 7:30 p.m., to sign and chat and get the information out and discuss education in schools, and that we urge everyone to attend. And if you can't, drop by and pick up the book another time, but this is the time to come tonight when he'll be there to get all these ideas out there and listen to your ideas. And
great, that sounds terrific.
I appreciate,
thanks so much for doing this.
No, I appreciate you talking to us, and good luck with it all.
Thanks a lot. Take care now.
You too, sir. Be well.
Bye-bye.